Just imagine, 1930, the future. According to 1930, before Star Wars, before 2001, A Space Odyssey, and even before Flash Gordon first appeared on screen, there was Just Imagine, a musical sci-fi satire released in 1930 by Fox Film Corporation. It imagined the year 1980 as a world of flying cars, government-arranged marriages, and rockets to Mars, all set to song. Today, it's nearly forgotten, but in its time, Just Imagine was one of the most expensive and visually ambitious films ever made. The story follows a man who is struck by lightning and wakes up 50 years later in a futuristic New York City. There, people are identified by numbers instead of names. Marriages are approved by state officials, and babies are grown in artificial incubators. But at its heart, the film is a love triangle, with two young men competing for the right to marry a woman, a decision ultimately made by the government. In an effort to win her hand, they journey to Mars in a rocket ship and encounter a bizarre alien civilization, complete with twin queens, exotic landscapes, and a Martian version of vaudeville. Just Imagine was released during the early days of talking pictures, only 3 years after The Jazz Singer. Sound was still a novelty, and musicals were wildly popular. But what made Just Imagine groundbreaking was its use of science fiction as a visual playground. The futuristic cityscapes were constructed using elaborate models, matte paintings, and practical effects. The production reportedly cost over $1 million, a staggering figure for the time, making it one of the most lavish pre-code films of the early 1930s. Critics were fascinated, if slightly confused. Variety praised its technical achievement but called the plot strange. Some saw it as satire, others as a sincere attempt at futurism. And although audiences were initially intrigued, the film quickly faded from circulation. Its blend of genres, musical, comedy, romance, sci-fi, made it difficult to categorize. Rocket Ship XM, the race to space before Sputnik. In 1950, America hadn't yet launched a single satellite into orbit. NASA didn't exist. The moon was still untouched. But in the darkened theaters of post-war America, audiences boarded the rocket ship XM, one of Hollywood's very first serious attempts at space exploration on screen. Released by Lippert Pictures, a low-budget studio known for westerns and thrillers, this unassuming sci-fi drama became an unlikely trailblazer. It wasn't just another fantasy, it was a grim, thought-provoking meditation on the cost of ambition and humanity's place in the universe. The film begins with the launch of Earth's first manned expedition to the moon. But a miscalculation sends the crew off course, slingshotting them toward Mars instead. What they find on the red planet is far from hopeful. Instead of little green men or grand Martian civilizations, they discover the ruins of a society destroyed by nuclear war, a powerful metaphor that would have struck deep in a world still recovering from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Rocket Ship XM was directed by Kurt Neumann and starred Lloyd Bridges, Osa Masson, and John Emery. Though produced on a modest budget, just $94,000, it delivered a surprising emotional weight. Unlike later, more escapist sci-fi adventures, this film leaned into realism and philosophical reflection. The spacecraft's interior was stark and functional, the characters were scientists rather than action heroes, and the tone was somber, even fatalistic. Released just weeks before Destination Moon, which had the backing of George Pal and a much higher production budget, Rocket Ship XM managed to capture the public's imagination first. Queen of Outer Space, the Venusian empire of glamour and camp. In 1958, audiences craving escapism were treated to one of the most colorful, eccentric, and unintentionally comedic space adventures ever to blast off from Hollywood sound stages. That film was Queen of Outer Space, a low-budget sci-fi fantasy that combined Cold War anxieties, post-war fashion, and a heavy dose of 1950s kitsch. While rarely ranked among serious science fiction classics, the film has developed a cult following for its bold visual style, campy dialogue, and the magnetic presence of its lead Zsa Zsa Gabor, playing a Venusian scientist in high heels. The plot follows 4 American astronauts who are accidentally pulled off course and crash land on Venus. There, they discover a matriarchal society ruled by Queen Yelena, a masked tyrant who has banned men from the planet after surviving a brutal war. The Queen sees the new arrivals as a threat and orders their execution. But not all the Venusian women agree. A group of rebels, led by the beautiful scientist Thalia, played by Gaber, conspire to help the men escape, overthrow the queen, and as expected in 1950s, Hollywood restore balance by reintroducing male companionship. Though absurd by today's standards, the film was emblematic of the era. It recycled props and costumes from earlier sci-fi movies, including Forbidden Planet, and dressed its cast of Venusian women in evening gowns and glittering makeup. The sets were often repurposed from other productions, but painted in bright colors and doused in fog to create an otherworldly effect. Audiences weren't meant to take it seriously, and many didn't. Yet behind its flamboyant style was a fascinating mix of themes. The fear of a society without men echoed Cold War-era concerns about gender roles and changing social norms. First Spaceship on Venus, when science was a global dream. At the dawn of the 1960s, space was no longer just fantasy, it was becoming real. The Soviet Union had launched Sputnik. The United States was racing to catch up, and for the first time, the idea of reaching other planets felt just over the horizon. In that cultural moment, First Spaceship on Venus arrived a serious-minded international space epic that few remember today, but which once captured the imagination of audiences around the world. Originally titled Der Schweigende Stern, The Silent Star, the film was a joint production between East Germany and Poland. It was based on The Astronauts, a novel by famed Polish science fiction writer Stanisław Lem, and directed by Kurt Maitzig. The film was later dubbed into English and released in the US in 1962 as First Spaceship on Venus. While often dismissed as a Cold War curiosity, it was in fact one of the first science fiction films to depict a truly multinational space crew years before Star Trek made it mainstream. The story begins with a mysterious object found in the Gobi Desert, a long-lost artifact from Venus, written in an alien language. Scientists decode its message, which appears to be a record of a planned invasion of Earth. Alarmed, a team of experts is assembled to launch the first human expedition to Venus. The crew includes astronauts, engineers, a linguist, a physician, and even a computer specialist, a rare depiction of diverse, collaborative science at the time. Among them are men and women of different races and nationalities, presented as equals in the pursuit of knowledge. When they arrive on Venus, the astronauts find a ruined, lifeless planet. Signs of advanced technology are everywhere, but the society that built it has long since perished in a nuclear holocaust of its own making. The film doesn't end with a battle or triumph, but with a solemn warning. This is what happens when power outpaces wisdom. Visually, First Spaceship on Venus was impressive for its time. The Venusian architecture is surreal and haunting, with winding tubes, spiked towers, and desolate landscapes filmed in dramatic lighting. The Angry Red Planet, the monster movie that went to Mars. In the late 1950s, Hollywood was fascinated with Mars. The Red Planet offered the perfect backdrop for Cold War anxieties, scientific curiosity, and cosmic horror. But among the many films to explore it, The Angry Red Planet stands out not for its budget or realism, but for its unforgettable visuals, unique filmmaking technique, and sheer narrative ambition. Today, it's remembered more for its style than its story. But back in 1959, this film gave audiences a Mars they'd never forget. Directed by Ib Melchior and produced by Sidney Pink, The Angry Red Planet was created on a shoestring budget of roughly $200,000 and filmed in just 9 days. Faced with limited resources but high aspirations, the filmmakers came up with a novel solution, Cinemagic. This special process combined live action with hand-drawn elements and solarized color effects, giving the Martian sequences a surreal, glowing red hue. The result was a dreamlike, sometimes nightmarish vision of an alien world, entirely unlike anything else on screen at the time. The story follows a 4-person crew sent to Mars on the first manned expedition. Upon arrival, they encounter bizarre terrain and monstrous creatures, including a giant amoeba with a spinning eye, man-eating plants, and perhaps most famously, the rat-bat spider crab, a towering alien beast that has haunted sci-fi fans for generations. When the mission goes wrong, only 2 astronauts return to Earth. One is catatonic, the other severely injured. The film unfolds in flashbacks, as Earth scientists piece together what really happened on the doomed voyage. While the plot falls into familiar B-movie territory, it's the visuals that set the angry red planet apart. The cinemagic technique was criticized for its simplicity at the time, but it gave the Martian surface an otherworldly glow that looked both stylized and unsettling. The strange shifting red filters and stylized black outlines gave the planet an abstract, painted quality less like a physical space and more like a hallucination. When worlds collide, the end of Earth, the hope of a new one. In the early 1950s, as the world stood between post-war recovery and atomic anxiety, Hollywood delivered a space epic that imagined not the conquest of other planets, but the survival of our own species. When Worlds Collide, produced by science fiction visionary George Pal, dared to tackle planetary extinction long before apocalyptic films became a genre of their own. It asked a simple but terrifying question: what would humanity do if it knew the Earth had only days left? Released in 1951 by Paramount Pictures and directed by Rudolph Maté, When Worlds Collide was adapted from the novel by Edwin Ballmer and Philip Wiley. The plot unfolds with urgent intensity. Scientists discover a rogue star, Belus, is on a direct collision course with Earth. In its orbit is a habitable planet, Zyra, humanity's one slim chance at survival. As governments fail to act, a group of private benefactors, engineers, and researchers races against time to build an interstellar ark that can carry a select group of humans to safety before Earth is destroyed. The film's themes were ambitious for its time. While the concept of space travel had been explored before, this was one of the first Hollywood films to show it as a matter of desperate necessity, not noble exploration. Earth is doomed, and the focus shifts not on heroism but on selection, who gets to live and who is left behind. The questions of moral worth, scientific value, and political favoritism hang over the film's characters as they face extinction. Despite being produced on a relatively modest budget, around $1 million, When Worlds Collide was a technical marvel. Its visual effects, including tidal waves, collapsing cities, and the rocket launch, earned it the Academy Award for Best Special Effects. George Pal, who would go on to produce The War of the Worlds and The Time Machine, became a pioneer in visualizing disaster and science fiction with a sense of realism and emotional weight. It, the terror from beyond space. Before Alien, there was it. In 1958, a low-budget science fiction film quietly crept into theaters, offering something darker, leaner, and more claustrophobic than the typical cosmic adventure of the decade. Its title was simple: It, the terror from beyond space, but its influence would be enormous. Over 20 years later, Ridley Scott's Alien would reinvent the concept with bigger effects and deeper horror, but many critics and historians still trace its cinematic DNA directly back to It. The story is deceptively straightforward. Set in the near future, a rescue mission is sent to Mars to retrieve the sole survivor of an earlier expedition. That survivor, Colonel Edward Carruthers, is accused of murdering his crew but insists a deadly creature was responsible. The rescuers don't believe him, and they bring him aboard their ship to return to Earth. What they don't realize is that something else, something monstrous, has also boarded. As the ship travels back through deep space, crew members begin disappearing one by one, and the claustrophobic halls of the spacecraft become a deadly trap. Directed by Edward L. Kahn and written by Jerome Bixby, who would later contribute stories to Star Trek and co-write Fantastic Voyage, the film was made on a very tight budget, rumored to be under $100,000. Sets were minimal, effects modest, and the Martian landscape was little more than a dusty soundstage. But what it lacked in resources, it made up for in atmosphere. The film's tightly contained setting, ticking clock structure, and growing sense of dread marked a shift in sci-fi storytelling, one that favored psychological tension over spectacle. The creature itself, designed by actor and stuntman Ray Crash Corrigan, was a towering humanoid in a rubber suit. While dated by today's standards, the design was terrifying to 1950s. Audiences made even more effective by strategic shadows, tight framing, and limited visibility. The decision to show the alien sparingly helped heighten suspense, anticipating techniques used in later horror classics. Journey to the Seventh Planet, When Outer Space Became Inner Space. By the early 1960s, space adventure films were moving beyond flying saucers and bug-eyed monsters. With the space race heating up and human consciousness becoming a new frontier, some science fiction began turning inward, questioning not just what we might find in the stars, but what we might bring with us. Journey to the Seventh Planet, released in 1962, was one of the earliest films to explore the intersection between outer space and the human mind. It came from Denmark, shot in English with an international cast, but played like an American drive-in thriller with strange psychological undertones. Set in the futuristic year 2001, the story follows a United Nations crew of astronauts on a mission to Uranus, the seventh planet from Earth. Upon landing, they discover something completely unexpected: a lush, Earth-like environment where time and space seem distorted. Stranger still, the planet begins to manifest their own thoughts, memories, and fears in physical form. Familiar people appear. Desires are fulfilled. But soon, their fantasies turn into nightmares, revealing that a powerful alien intelligence is using their minds against them. Directed by Sid Pink, who also produced Reptilicus, and written by Ib Melchior, Journey to the Seventh Planet was an unusual blend of budget-conscious science fiction and psychological allegory. Its concept that astronauts might confront their subconscious selves while exploring another world was remarkably ahead of its time. A decade later, Andrei Tarkovsky's Solaris, and even elements of 2001, A Space Odyssey would explore similar ideas, albeit with more artistry and scale. But this modest little film got there first, even if it did so with papier-mâché sets and rubber monsters. The production was filmed in Copenhagen, with an eye toward exporting to the American market. American actor John Agar, a staple of 1950s sci-fi and horror, was cast as the mission commander to give the film star power in U.S. theaters.